Mr. Ambassador, it's good to see you. What do you make of Vladimir Putin's comments today and the reaction to his comments?
Well, Simone, you already highlighted two very important things that he said today that he usually doesn't say. He called the war a war. He didn't call it a special military operation in Ukraine. That's what he usually calls it. And he also labeled it a tragedy, as you pointed out. That's new. That's different. He was reacting and he went off script. I watched the speech. He put his speech down and then he went ad-libbed when he was responding to those leaders that you just mentioned. It was irritating to him, just like you said. He had to listen to other people criticizing him and he pushed back and he played the whataboutism game, right? And in particular, what about Gaza? What about what's happening there? What about the Middle East? Not about what's happening in Ukraine, as a way to defray the criticism of himself.
You know, he brought up Gaza and what's happening in the Middle East. And it seems to me that he's hoping that the United States and also Ukraine's allies, Western allies, that they get distracted. From what I've seen, I don't think that is happening, at least not here in the United States just yet. But what about the other allies of Ukraine? Are folks getting slightly distracted?
Well, generally, there's distraction because the counteroffensive in Ukraine didn't go as it hoped this fall. And so there's now lots of debate about what to do next. And that's exactly what Putin wants. He wants us to be debating it. He wants the U.S. Congress to delay military assistance. That's good news for Putin. And he wants us to just talk about the war in the Middle East and not talk about his war. That's all good news for him. And by the way, Simone, your last piece is also good news for him. When we're talking about the disasters that might happen to American democracy, that's what he's waiting for as well. And in particular, I think it's very clear now that Putin will not negotiate until he knows who the next president of the United States will be, because he feels, I think quite rightly, by the way, I think it's rational on his part, that he could get a better deal if Mr. Trump was the president of the United States.
But is President Zelensky of Ukraine even in the position where he is talking about negotiating with Vladimir Putin? You know, I've talked to a number of parliament members in Ukraine who say they will accept nothing less than full sovereignty. And full sovereignty means all of their territory, Crimea, the Donbass, everything.
Well, you're absolutely right. Number one, President Zelensky shares that view. I saw him in September in Kiev. He made that very clear. Number two, Ukraine is a democracy. It's not a dictatorship like Russia. And the vast, overwhelming majority, 90%, I think, by the last poll that I saw, supports exactly what you just outlined. So even if Zelensky thought that it was time to negotiate, he can't do that because his people don't want him to. But I want to underscore a very important thing, because a lot of Americans, a lot of Europeans are giving Zelensky advice about how he should negotiate. Lots of people telling him what he should do. Nobody is telling Putin what he should do. And if Putin doesn't want to negotiate, it doesn't matter what you tell Zelensky, there will be no negotiations.
I guess my last question for you, Mr. Ambassador, is who could exert that influence over President Putin? Is it President Xi Jinping of China? And is there a willingness to do that even?
Well, certainly the Ukrainians think that it's Xi Jinping. They've been trying to court relations with the Chinese for several months now. They think that she's the only person that could do that. But their calculus is until our presidential elections are over, there's no opportunity for negotiations. What happens after that, maybe that's when Xi Jinping or even the United States president could play a role. But before then, Putin's locked in. He's not going to negotiate, and we just should accept that as a fact.